Well, any shooting on location has its challenges, but because on location, it gives you different gifts. You would center yourself in DC or Baltimore area and then just do everything from there, but that wasn't economically feasible as well as the stage space. Shooting in Toronto filled in the East Coast for us, which was actually pretty great.
The challenges of shooting in Toronto, there are a few of them. Probably the biggest for me personally was just being away from my home and family and friends and my animals for 3 years. That was an isolating experience, but fortunately we have a fantastic crew in Toronto.
Toronto gave us the benefit of a depth of crew, excellent crew, a large amount of stage space, because over 3 seasons, the amount of sets that we had collapsed as well as standing. That afforded us to be able to keep things standing. And also being a center. It's an international port as well as an international airport, a center for a huge, pretty much the Canadian, East economy is centered out of there.
I guess it was, all we needed really was a city. It didn't have to have the specific landmarks of Baltimore. And Baltimore is part of the story, but it's not really an intricate part of the story, So, and also some scenes happen in Virginia, so I think Toronto was a good, worked for all of that.
In front of the camera, what you're looking at is a city that has so many varied exteriors and so much in terms of space that can be molded to look like somewhere else. It's not to say Toronto doesn't have a distinctive personality, because it does, but it also has a kind of chameleon-like quality in that you can turn a street corner in Toronto and feel like you're in Baltimore, or turn the next one and you're in Philadelphia, and the next one you're in New York. The countryside around Toronto allowed us to feel very much like we were in Maryland or Virginia.
We had an amazing visual effects team that was able to create Baltimore when we needed Toronto to be Baltimore. And our makeup and hair teams were fantastic. Our wardrobe is fantastic. Our production design was fantastic. So we created a home and a vocabulary for the show that seemed to be resulting in what we needed the show to be.
They've got great museums, they've got great restaurants, they've got great neighborhoods, and it's not that far from the United States. If you want to get home, you can get home and enjoy being at home, and then you can go back to work. So I've made myself at home there, and I really enjoyed it.
Will you go home?
One thing that was striking me from the very beginning is that it feels very much like being home for at least a Dane or Scandinavian. There's an attitude or a mentality that is very Scandinavian in Toronto. And we also have the weather in common. It's very cold.
The challenge of being in Toronto, I suppose, for us was born of the fact that we were there exclusively during the winter for 3 years in a row. And I mean, that's just a challenge of living there. I don't think Torontonians are tend to be big complainers, but even they would say oh man, you really need to be here for the summer. I never got to see that. I hear it's lovely.
It's funny how we ended up, all 3 seasons, being collapsed into going into the winter season with you start production shooting in September, they come with a quick fall. And then we ended up in April. Well, everything starts to freeze by the time of November. January is just horrible, January, February. And this last year, season 3, was particularly cold and bitter. And 2 days out of our 7, if not 8 days of shooting are outside.
It is a huge pain in the ass to shoot in, but fortunately for me, I got to stay indoors most of the time, so it was really a big problem for the actors who had to go out on locations in sub-zero temperatures.
Esophagus is destroyed. The bite almost severed his head.
There's a scene where we're at the truck stop, where the trucker has been killed by the animal, and that's the coldest day that's the coldest I've ever been as a human being on the planet Earth in my lifetime. And I'm on top of that truck, and everybody is so cold. And you can see it in that scene where everyone is just like, it leads to I think there's a presentness to everyone in that scene where there's murder and it's cold, and it just creates a real world.
Well, I remember how it was so cold that Maz wore a hat. That's my number one. Lawrence is the best. Lawrence has the hardest time with the cold.
Shooting in Toronto in the wintertime, particularly the winter of 2014 and the winter of 2013, brutal winters. We haven't seen winters like that in North America in probably 25 years.
You know, there were some days I think we were shooting in like minus 27 degrees or something. There was the day that Lawrence had to chase me around in the second season in the snow, and that was cold, very, very cold.
I mean, that's obviously Brian comes up with these ideas in the springtime, and he keeps forgetting what season we're working in. So, but I've been fortunate again. It's been a good old Hugh Dancy has been staying out there in the snow, naked, reaching for the moon.
And that was tough. There were some long, brutally cold nights. But I think, you know, actually that pays off in just off the top of my head in season 2, when I'm running through the snow outside my house carrying my wounded dog and my shotgun. It was so cinematic, you know, and that was born of being in a very, very cold place.
What I think sadly was great about Toronto, I say sadly as a true Canadian, is the winter made the show look fantastic. Our winters are so cold, so cold, but we often have very bright winters, so that wonderful light against the snow that we captured through all 3 seasons, and especially in this season, really is something you need to go to the north for, and really made, I think, the Canadian location work, as much as we hated the cold.
I've always admired teachers molding impressionable young minds, but you can only learn so much and live.
It's part of my life to shoot winters. I've always done it, so it's not that big of a challenge. I think it's more of a challenge for people coming in from LA or New York. So I think the winters are beautiful when they're beautifully shot by cinematographers. I love seeing, I think that's why Fargo was such a big hit too, is they're kind of fascinating winters on screen. You know? So I think Hannibal got to have a lot of that beautiful snow that Toronto got in the past 2 years. So I think it's a plus, actually.
Maybe I'm a bit of a masochist, but I really believe that sometimes difficult environmental circumstances can really help with creating art, because it makes people bond against something.
So I think it was much harder on the actors and the crew than anything I can speak to personally, but they usually persevered and got tremendous footage, because that weather and that winter can be glorious cinematically.
It was definitely challenging and it was hard, but again, I think it added to just the production value of our show. I mean, you can tell that we're not, you know, pretending to be cold.
Chief Investigator Rinaldo Pazzi, Questura di Firenze.
You're a long way from Florence.
You are a long way from Baltimore.
I knew that there was going to be a Europe element, and I think, I'm not even sure if production knew to what degree that was going to be, whether it was going to be the whole season or partial season or what it was going to take.
Well, Florence gave the show an authenticity to the literature that we felt we needed. If we were going to be telling the full Hannibal story, we had to include the chapters of the novel Hannibal that took place in Florence.
So it's very exciting for me to be here, because we were here about 13 years ago shooting Hannibal, the movie. And in terms of differences between the story, what Brian Fuller and the writers have done in The Room is kind of smash up a lot of what Thomas has alluded to, written about. There's the Mind Palace that we explore. There's bits and pieces of Hannibal Rising. There's a bit of Hannibal Lecter's past that he visits or comes back to visit him. So it's just all very exciting, and much more to come.
Well, it was a real pitch you know, going into what season 3 was going to be, and Brian and I, you know, pitched that by telling the story of Hannibal, you were off the northern continent soil. You were over in Europe, you were in Italy. You were also visiting Hannibal Lecter's home, so you were obviously taking a certain look. Shooting in Florence and having that look was totally different from what you would find in the States or in Canada.
We have a lot to pack into a very short time because you know, we're trying to spread our resources as thinly as possible, in the sense that the whole first half of this season takes us all across Europe, and these few days here are going to make that real for us in the show. Yeah, it was a huge decision for the people who make those kind of decisions, you know, to take for us and to allow us to do that. But I think it would have been almost impossible to do the first half of the show the way Brian had envisaged without that.
And we all, you know, said, yes, we can do it, you know, until you started crunching the numbers. How would you do it? How many days could you shoot over there? And trade off to a shorter shooting period, a smaller crew, and then building more sets.
It felt like it was an elegance that we needed to explore, not only for the characters' point of view, but just for the show to evolve and tell stories in a different way. Changing our setting to something that is old world felt like it was just the infusion of fresh energy that we needed.
To have such an extraordinary backdrop and an ancient backdrop, and you know, it being Christmas time and everything, it's great.
Well, of course, we only shot in Florence for a week, but I think what that brings to the show, you know, a single shot of Mads limping across a bridge, or you know, Lawrence throwing his ring into the river, or whatever it might be, is so big, and you know, it expands the world, and it really places it in that old world, you know, old Europe, and that's Hannibal's world.
Having the historical references around it, you know, in frame, in a city like Florence, having the architecture as a backdrop, and you can't shoot scenes like that in, you know, it's shot in Toronto, I'm sorry to say, but you know, that backdrop does not exist in downtown Toronto. And so to have the richness of that and everything that it harks back to, there's no painted backdrop that you could put in that would ever kind of duplicate the richness that delivers.
We had to do it really sort of kind of, you know, guerrilla style. It was challenging because so many people recognized us on the street, so there were a lot of distractions for us as we were trying to act these scenes, whatever they were. And there were, you know, some sort of spoiler things that, you know, we were shooting that were like spoiler worthy, so we had to be a little kind of cloak and dagger about it.
I mean, sometimes it's more challenging because you know, in a city like Florence, where you might have less control of the streets that you would have in Toronto, it has an impact on the scenes and how long scenes take.
A few hiccups, as production, any production has hiccups. You know, it's Murphy's Law. What was planned is not going to go according to plan.
We had very little control over the environment. People looking at us with our camera crew and our sound things, and you know, being curious about that, and not understanding that, you know, if they're walking in the middle of the shot, it's no good, and you know, just basically kind of just being exposed.
The filming in Florence was a bit of a logistical nightmare because we were trying to figure out how we were going to get all of the exterior material for not just one episode, but 6 episodes directed by a few different directors, and yet having only one being able to go to Florence to shoot, not only for his episodes, but for all the episodes around it. So it was an interesting challenge, and there were a lot of things that we attempted in Italy that simply didn't work. You know, we had to cut a lot of footage that just was not up to the par of the show because it was done very almost guerrilla style, and it was inelegant, and it was rough, and it was rushed, and the whole point of going to Italy was being able to continue the standards of production that we had established in Toronto
Well, I really wonder whether shooting more would have been even less expensive than the amount of sets that we built, because it became quite costly, because the detail, I mean, that's what's so great about our show and that we were allowed to do, but the detail and the finishing of our sets is just a wonderful standard of quality for television.
We were not able to bring our crew to Italy. So our department heads and makeup and hair and wardrobe were not our people. So things that looked good in Toronto, once they are put on by other people who don't know how the hat should tip, they sort of looked ridiculous. So there's scenes with Bedelia and Diamond in the streets of Italy where she's wearing a hat that looks like a collapsed souffle and a fur coat that looks like a potato sack, all of which look great in Toronto, but you get them in another country with a language barrier and things just don't look as well.
I feel badly if that's still bothering Brian, because I think he did a brilliant job in recutting everything, and we did some minor reshoots to try and rectify any of the things that didn't quite work in Florence.
2 bottiglie di batad Montrachet da tutti bianchi, per favore.
I would have loved personally to have gone, and I would have loved to see him go as well, because he was our overseer maestro for the entire show, not just the look, but every single element of it. So I think it was unfortunate.
You reshoot stuff all the time. I mean, you know, we didn't. There's plenty of stuff that we shot in Toronto that we reshot because, you know, the reason Hannibal is the show it is that the quality control visually is exacting, you know, and we would make people do stuff all the time again in Toronto, and they'd be looking at us going, it's fine. We go, it's fine, but it's not great.
It was a very frustrating experience to kind of have to trust other people who haven't worked on the show for 2.5 seasons to do the work to the meticulous standards that we've established.
One of the things that we probably got wrong was that because we were so busy in writing and editing and shooting, neither Brian nor I went, and actually one of us should have been, is the key thing. I think if we had our time again, I think either he or I would have gone, and we'd have had our eye on it.
It was frustrating on one hand, and then the stuff that we got that worked really well. So we got some gorgeous stuff out there, but we got a lot of stuff that we just simply could not use.
You learn that no matter how much you plan and how much you work on things, and it's no one's fault, that if you hand something that someone has lived and breathed with over to someone else, things will fall through the cracks.
So that was the challenging side of it. The great side of it is obviously being in Florence during Christmas time. The food, the people who were just lovely.
And I think we did it around Christmas time, so we already spent a lot of time in Canada and Toronto shooting. And then I think it was just nice for all of us to get out. Everyone from the cast was there, and all of a sudden we're like on a school trip for a week in fantastic weather, fantastic food, in this beautiful, beautiful city. I thought that was a little extra present we got before we wrapped the whole thing up.
It was a bit like a school trip. Yeah, I mean, we were there. There was, not all the cast were there, but a good number of us.
Mad jealousy, yes, of course. They were all off to Florence having a mighty good time filming these episodes that I was not part of course. And I've barely seen Italy, so it would have been such a great way of next time. But yeah, I wasn't in the first 3, so I missed all of that fun.
And so, yeah, we got together, we had good meals. We did what you do when you're in Italy. We had good food and wine. It was great.
Florence was great for all of us. Just to spend time in a different way together was really like having a weekend trip with the school.
So it was a really, really wonderful way to be working, and I only wish we could have done some more.